Well, I just wanted to take the opportunity to open here for just a minute or so. One of the things I wanted to do is, again, thank Human Health and Performance for sponsoring the Innovation Lecture Series that they've had for a while, because it certainly fits into all the things that we've been talking about here at JSC, including JSC 2.0, which is about advancing human spaceflight by looking at how we can do things differently. And so anytime we can understand how we can perform our jobs more effectively, more efficiently, and all in the goal of advancing human spaceflight. That's what we're encouraging everybody to do across the center. And of course, I think this directorate has really taken the lead in a lot of areas in terms of innovative tools, innovative processes, and really trying to do things differently. So that was probably the main thing I wanted to talk about. But of course, this is a very interesting topic, I think, for all of us here at JSC, because teamwork, team performance, debriefs, lessons learned, all of those things are just real, have always been and will continue to be very important for us. As we do operations, we want to make sure we're learning from everything that we're doing and carrying that forward and understanding how we can be more effective. So a very relevant topic for all of us. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff Davis.
So a few words about Scott. He's an industrial organizational psychologist with over 25 years as a practitioner leading the group for organizational effectiveness, which he co-founded in 1987. Through that group and his work, he's worked with over 500 organizations globally, including more than 75 Fortune and Global 1000 companies working on teamwork. He has worked in a wide array of organizations, which I think you'll find interesting. So he's worked with medical teams, aviation, finance, technology, research and development, customer service, and leadership teams. So a wide background. He has also been doing current work on research in our spaceflight environment, which I think you'll find very interesting in a variety of different areas. And finally, he is a fellow of the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology, a fellow of the Association for Psychological Science. He is co-editor of the book Developing and Enhancing Teamwork in Organizations, Evidence-Based Best Practices and Guidelines. And just bringing it even closer to home, Scott worked with our Human Health and Performance group twice, which we found very valuable for our teamwork understanding. So without further ado, and not cutting into any more of Scott's time, I will introduce Dr. Scott Tannenbaum. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thanks. Thank you, Bill. I love getting applause before I even say anything. That's just a great way to start the day. I think everyone should start their day that way. For the last 3 years or so, I've had the good fortune of being able to do some research with people at NASA. I'm certainly going to share some of that information with you. And as Jeff mentioned, we've worked with a lot of teams over the years, so I'll also share some of our experiences there. But to start, I just want to give a quick thank you, because our 3 years of work that we've done would not have been as successful if it wasn't for the support of a lot of people. And certainly colleagues on the BHP, HRP side, including Brandon Vesey and others, have been very instrumental in guiding us. Early on, we had the opportunity to interact with a number of subject matter experts who pointed us in the right direction. I think we would have missed the target had we not gotten the advice from some of the folks that you see here, including Al Holland and others. And then we've had the chance to gather data from Hera and NEMO environments. We've gotten great support there as well. So Mark Regan at NEMO and Yvonne Parsons has been very helpful in the work on the Hera site as well, and I'll share a little bit about that with you. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our research team, folks that have been working with us from my organization and from University of Connecticut and University of Central Florida. While I'm going to share with you mostly applied practical sort of things today, I did just want to let you know that this group has been working on trying to disseminate information scientifically as well. So this effort sort of produced a number of publications. We've got some other things coming down the pipeline as well, trying to do both the science and the practice side. Okay, so here's what I'd like to do today. Based on some of the experiences that we've had in a wide range of organizations, I'm going to start by sharing four observations that we've seen across many companies. Secondly, what I want to do is I'd like to share with you some of the underlying psychological science. If I'm successful today, I'd like you to know a little bit more about what underlies team effectiveness and really tap into the empirical research. So But what's the data telling us really makes a difference in driving team effectiveness, what we'll call the 7 C's, and I'll share those with you. Third, I'll take a little time and share with you some of the research that we've been doing at NASA in the NEMO and HERA environments and elsewhere. And I want to leave some time at the end for you to pose questions. I'd be happy to answer those. I'll also foreshadow one punchline. So I'm going to tell you that you need to debrief more frequently. You're going to hear this a few different ways. So in the back of your mind, process that. When we get to the end, I'll show you a tool and some methods are associated with that as well. Now, as we go through, I'd like to encourage you to conduct a thought experiment. And by thought experiment, I mean I'd encourage you to think about a particular team. So first of all, how many of you were on a team? Okay, that's encouraging. This would have been a very short session. I'd say thank you. We can go now. Any of you leading any teams, a project team, work team at all? Yep, okay. Any of you on more than one team at work? Yeah, very, very common, right? So I'd like you to pick one. Pick one team that you're either a member of or that you're a leader of. And as I go through and I share with you sort of what the science says about teamwork, I'd like you to think, how does what I'm saying compare to your team, and where might there be opportunities to boost your team's effectiveness a bit? Now, Jeff mentioned to you my company is called the Group for Organizational Effectiveness, and we've worked with a lot of different types of teams. So in addition to the types that Jeff mentioned, we've had a chance to work a lot with military teams and medical teams. We've been out on some oil rigs and cruise ships. My team liked it when we got a project with the cruise ships. They preferred that to the oil rig. I'm not sure why. But we've gathered data in a number of places, and we've worked extensively with teams, and that's what I want to share with you today. But I want to start off with 4 observations based on what we've seen across organizations. And the first observation is that there's a lot of teams out there, and there's a proliferation and more teams. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that if anything, collaboration requirements are increasing rather than decreasing. And when I asked you how many of you are on more than one team, most of you raised your hands. Now, the Corporate Executive Board gathered data from some 20,000 plus people, and over 2/3 of people in organizations report that collaboration requirements are on the rise in their organization. What I also want to be clear, though, is I am not here to advocate we need a team for everything. I know I'm a team guy, but I'm not telling you teams are the answers to everything. What I am telling you is you're going to be on a lot of teams. Throughout your career, you're going to be on a lot of teams. So whether you like them or not, some people love working on teams, some people hate it. It's just important that we understand how they work so we can get the most out of the experiences with them. Second observation. We're talking about this a lot. I don't know if you've ever seen Google's Ngram system, but it counts the number of times words appear in print on a decade-by-decade basis. We are talking about teams with an all-time high. Interesting, a little bump at World War II talking about collaboration, but as you can see the trend, we're talking about teams, and there are a lot of them. And although there's plenty of teams that are out there, the bad news is, and I'm sure you know this from your experience, that many, many teams are not as effective as they could be. We use the euphemism, suboptimal, but if you've been on a bad team experience, you know what that's like. And there's some data that shows that, this is from Leanne Davey, that over 90% of people in organizations recognize that teams are essential for their organization's effectiveness, but less than 1/4 of them think that their own teams are effective. So there's this gap there. And this suboptimal performance has a couple of obvious implications. It clearly has implications for our business, for our organization. When our teams aren't performing optimally, then it's going to affect the business success. But in addition, from a personal perspective, if you've ever been on a poor performing team, what does that feel like? It just drains you, right? And there's a reason for that. There's a psychological reason for that. And the reason is that experiences that we have in the presence of others is amplified. So if you're eating a great chocolate bar, it tastes better when there's people around you. And when you've had a bad team experience and you fail, it hurts more than just failing alone. Second observation. Third one. The best teams are those that self-adjust. So here's a second thought experiment. Not the team that you picked, but think about the very best team you've ever been on. And the question is, was that team great on day one? Probably not. Very, very, very few teams are great on day one. What makes teams great is that their ability to be able to adjust over time. Some teams do this naturally, but most teams don't. But even great teams need to be able to make adjustments if they want to sustain their success. So third observation. And finally, a lot of organizations talk about creating a culture of collaboration. So Procter & Gamble has gone on record as saying we want to be the best in the world at collaborating, inside and out. And Microsoft did a full reorganization were driven largely by their intent to try and increase collaboration in their organization. So while it's easy to talk about collaboration, it's difficult to build a culture of collaboration if our teams aren't collaborating effectively. It starts at the team level. So, internally, and then with our vendors and outside suppliers and other organizations, but it starts at the team level. This is particularly true with leadership teams. For any of you that are on leadership teams, be aware. I'll share with you some data about how what happens there permeates through the organization. But one way to think about this is every team experience that you're involved in, if it's good, it's contributing towards building a culture of collaboration. And when it's bad, it detracts from that culture. So with these 4 observations in mind, what I'd like to point out is that it's critical for us to crack the code. There's a lot of teams out there. Some of them aren't working as well as we'd like to. We want to build a culture of collaboration. They have to work well. We've got to crack the code. And the good news is in the last, let's say, 15 to 20 years, there's a growing body of empirical research that's actually giving us some tangible insights about what drives team effectiveness. And that's what I want to share with you. We refer to it as the science of teamwork. Now, before I do that, though, let's pose this question. Because I just told you it's hard. Right? It's not easy. It doesn't happen naturally. Less than a quarter of people report their own teams are successful. So is it worth the effort? And the data here is actually quite compelling. Jeff Lapine and colleagues did a meta-analysis of over 100 prior studies. I'm going to use that term meta-analysis a few times, so if you're not familiar with it, all it is we take all prior empirical studies that we could find and we statistically combine them. So we're more confident in the results of that than we would be any one study. So in Jeff Lapine's work, they found that teams that demonstrate good teamwork processes are 20 to 25% more likely to be successful. And there's some interesting data coming out of the medical world. We work a lot with medical teams too. The Institute of Medicine discovered that one of the primary causes for problems and sentinel events in hospitals are teamwork breakdowns. To give you an idea about a sentinel event, that's like we perform surgery on you and we leave the scalpel inside of you. Now, I'm not a doctor, but I think that's bad, okay? And there's even some data that shows financially, organizations that are able to drive collaborative performance show financial benefits. So I think the data is pretty clear. It's worth the effort. It doesn't happen easily, but it's worth the effort. What I'm talking about now, though, is true teamwork. So I'm not necessarily talking about whether we like each other, although that's good. I think it's awesome to like your team members. I think it's great, may occasionally go to dinner together or do those things, but that's not what drives team effectiveness. There's other factors that drive team effectiveness. When we get those right, that's when we get these payoffs that occur. I use the term team effectiveness a lot. Let me be clear. I'm not talking about one shot we succeeded. What I'm talking about is sustainable performance over time. When I talk about teams that are highly effective, these are teams that are able to demonstrate sustained performance in terms of results, in terms of maintaining vitality. And some of the research we've been doing here and elsewhere is about resilience, being able to bounce back, because all teams face challenges. The best teams are those that bounce back. So when I say effective teams, this is what I'm referring to. Now, I want to pose this question because before I start going into the research, the answer to this question is important for interpreting the research that's out there. The answer to this is, of course, not. And yet I go into many organizations, and all teams are kind of treated the same way. I went into a manufacturing organization, same policies and guidelines for all teams. Teams differ in a number of ways, but one of the key ways they differ is in terms of interdependency, the extent to which people on the team have to rely on one another to be able to get their work done effectively. So if you don't mind, I'm going to use a sports analogy here to sort of illustrate this. 10 different types of teams. We can think about them falling along a continuum from low to high. A team with low interdependency, this is a team that can prepare together. They might be able to train together. But when it's time to do work, when I'm actually performing my job, my task, I'm on my own. Now, ultimately, we add up the scores of individuals, and we figure out whether the team won. So some sales teams are like that, right? We call it a region, but really it's 12 salespeople, each out selling. At the end, we add it up and figure out if we made quota. If we move along in the continuum to medium, this is a team in which some team members need to coordinate with other team members periodically. Maybe not all the time, but certainly on some occasion. And then further to the right are teams that need to coordinate on a consistent basis. They need to have a shared understanding of things. So 10 types of teams. Soccer team, high. Gymnastic team, low. What about a relay race? A relay race is a classic example of medium. Individual, punctuated by tight coordination. If that coordination is handled wrong, the team fails. Swimming, mostly individual. American football, basketball. Wrestling, clearly individual. When I'm on the mat, you can't help me. We could train together, but once I'm on the mat, I'm on my own. Cricket, baseball. Does this distinction make sense? Right? in soccer, if we don't have a shared mental model, we can't try and set the other team offside. Imagine a football team that doesn't know the same play, right? So the key here, pick your team of choice if you're going to be. Synchronized swimming, maybe the ultimate example. If the toes are pointed in different directions, the team loses. It has to be coordinated all the time. The reason this is so important is that as you move from left to right on the continuum, teamwork, coordination becomes more important in predicting success. There are some work teams, and I put teams in quotes here, that really all that's needed is just not getting in each other's way and being civil. Because really it's more a wrestling team. But if your team moves it all along the continuum, starting here to wrestling plus and over, you're going to require some coordination. So let's go back to the thought experiment. You have your team in mind. Where do you fall today? Is your team operating more like a wrestling team, wrestling plus, baseball, baseball plus, football? Where are you? And equally important, should you be there? You know, would you be better moving along? I know in some senior leadership teams that I've been working with, almost consistently they've been saying, you know, we need to move a little bit left to right on this. Okay. This is important background before I talk about the research itself. So here's what the research reveals. It reveals there are 7 consistent drivers that determine whether a team is going to be effective or not. Again, let's do that thought experiment. Have your team in mind as I talk about the 7 C's. Where's your team on the C's? 7 C's are this. The first one is capability. Do we have ample knowledge, skills, and ability on our team to perform the task that we've been assigned? The second is about mindset. We call it cooperation. Attitudes. Do people on your team want to be on your team? Third, coordination. This is about the behaviors. This is at the heart of teamwork. Are we behaving as a team? Fourth, communication, both within the team and from the team outside to others. Fifth, we call cognition. This is the extent to which people on your team have a shared understanding about priorities, about sense of direction, about roles. Seventh, we call coaching. It's really about leadership. We would have called it leadership, but then we wouldn't have 7 C's. That wouldn't have been very good. We use the term coaching, but it's not just about the leader. It's about whether other people on the team also are demonstrating leadership behaviors. And lastly, conditions. And my colleague Ed Solis and I have been working in this space for a while. Ed likes to say conditions may be most important because teams don't operate in a vacuum. Right? So what are the conditions in which your team operates? What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about these 7 C's and share 1 or 2 research findings that may be of interest associated with each of them. Let's start first with capability. Remember, this is about, does your team have the knowledge, skills, abilities, the capabilities to be able to be successful? And sometimes in the movies, you get the impression that teamwork can overcome anything. The Bad News Bears, you know, ragtag team, they don't have the talent, but somehow they still win. In your work experience, does that really happen? No. So let's be clear, and the data shows this. If you have big talent gaps, it's hard to be successful. Teams do need competent individuals to be successful. But what's very interesting is simply boosting talent levels won't always boost team performance. It's true on the left end of that continuum. You add another star wrestler and an independent task, they'll be fine. But the research shows that if you start looking at above baseball team interdependency, sometimes adding talent actually decreases a team's performance. The 4th star on an NBA basketball team decreases that team performance. And very interestingly, you even see it in chickens. Chickens, and I'm from the Bronx, so I don't really know much about chickens, but what I've read is that if you take another alpha rooster and put them in a hen house where there's already a few roosters, egg production goes down. So it's not always, because you need talent, I want to be clear, but it's not always the answer, let's just get another talented person on the team. What matters very much are the other 6 C's, how the team works together. And some very interesting data from the financial analyst industry where Boris Grossberg and others have done work here. We've actually done work with them as well. These are folks that make 7-digit salaries. They're stars in the ultimate sense. They're supposed to be an analyst of an industry, the auto industry. You take these folks, and I see these organizations who think it's all about that person, and they steal them for another organization, on average, 5-year decline in performance from that person until they're back up to their levels. Particularly true if their team doesn't move with them, because it's not just about them, it's about the people around them. And particularly if they go to a place that has less favorable conditions. Okay, that's capability. It matters, but it's not the sole picture. Let's talk about cooperation. Remember, cooperation is about attitude. One of the attitudes and mindset that really matters is something called collective efficacy. We use that term as psychologists to mean the belief that individual team members have that their team will be successful. Not that I will be successful, but I believe that my team will be successful. And what the research shows is that all things being equal, teams with higher levels of collective efficacy outperform other teams. Stan Gulley and others published a meta-analysis on this. Now, when your team is all the way to the left, it's about self-efficacy and self-confidence. But once you start getting a little more into dependency, it's a matter of having a belief that we can be successful. And I talk to teams pretty regularly where I ask individuals, do you think you'll be successful? And they go, yes. What about your team? Not so much. Those teams are at risk. Now, I'll share with you that I'm a Boston Red Sox fan in baseball. Yes, I know. I'm from the Bronx, and I root for the Red Sox. You really don't need to know anything else about me other than that one fact. 2012, they were the worst team in baseball. On the start of the 2013 season, Dustin Pedroia and a few of his teammates get in a taxi cab who's driving erratically. And Pedroia says, hey, buddy, slow down. You're carrying this year's World Series champions. He maintained collective efficacy, even when the team wasn't performing well. Pretty impressive. If you're following them now, this is the second year in a row they're doing badly, I wonder what their collective efficacy is today. Maybe not so good. The second sort of cooperation or attitude that's of interest is collective orientation. Collective orientation is, we sometimes use the word team player, you know. They think team first, not me first. So collective orientation, people like being on a team. And the data shows, Jim Driscoll, Edit, Solis, and others have shown that collective orientation is in fact related to team performance, in part because it improves team interactions. But here's my experience. Not everybody on your team needs to be high in collective orientation. You need enough. If your team doesn't have enough, you struggle. If your team has enough, it sort of greases the skids a bit. And some very interesting research coming out of the Australian Special Forces. Their special forces are just like us in the U.S. Very rigorous, you know, very difficult, individually demanding skill set. You want to know what one of the top predictors they found of success in the Australian Special Forces is? Whether people perceive themselves as team players or not. It outpredicted physical fitness scores and other cognitive ability scores. This also helps dispel a myth, which is, oh, I can either be a team player or I can be an individual success. The data doesn't support that. You can be both. You can have the mindset that team matters and still be an individual success. And most of the cooperative attitudes, like trust and respect and cohesion, they emerge from the other 6 C's. So I can't make respect on my team. I can't make trust. We do the other 6 C's right, and those things tend to emerge from it. So let's do our thought experiment. Would your team benefit from some additional capabilities, either by bringing in somebody or maybe training? If I asked all the people on your team, hey, is this team going to be successful, what would they tell me? And do you have enough of these team-oriented people on your team? If not, those might be opportunity points. Okay, coordination. Coordination is about the behaviors that teams exhibit. Like I said, it's at the heart of teamwork. I already shared with you Jeff Lapine's work that shows that behaviors improve the probability of teamwork success. Now, Michelle Marks and John Matthew from our team and Steve Zaccaro have taken this a step further. They did a nice job of sort of splitting out and understanding the factors. I could probably spend an hour and just talk about that, right? But what I will tell you is as you move from left to right on that continuum, these things become more important. And I just picked 2 to talk about today. I want to say a few words about backup behavior and about conflict. Let's talk backup. What I have seen is that whether or not backup behavior, helping out one another on the team occurs, is a function of 3 things. First of all, have I staffed my team with people who have the ability to back up one another? Right? How have I designed the team? Secondly, have I trained people so they have the skills and they understand where they're supposed to back up? Sometimes people don't back up because they don't think they're supposed to. And the third piece is about attitude. It's beneath me to back up. If I have people on my team that think that, we're not going to see support and coverage for one another. Here's a true story. I was flying from Albany, New York to Boston, Massachusetts. I get to the airport. We're waiting for the plane, and it's a little 9-seat propeller plane. And I'm dressed like this, you know, and I'm the first person to board the plane. And there's one pilot, and there's 9 seats. So I jokingly asked the pilot, do you mind if I sit up front? And she said, no, come on up. Cool. So now you're in the plane, you're getting up behind me. You look in the cockpit, and you see, like, someone in a pilot suit and Scott. How do you feel about that backup? Instantly, I will tell you, my attitude was awesome. So much that she had to keep saying things like, oh, don't touch that. So it's not just attitude, it's knowing when, and maybe when not, and also having the skills. Now let's talk conflict. Conflict is complex. Is conflict good? Is it bad? Depends. What does it depend on? Well, first of all, it depends on what your team is disagreeing about most frequently. If you reflect back on your team, right, all teams disagree about things. Where are you spending your time disagreeing? And this is from Frank DeWitt, and some of his colleagues have discovered this. If most of your time disagreeing is about interpersonal sorts of things, performance declines when you have conflict. If most of your time is spent on process things, tactical stuff, scheduling, things like that, performance goes down. But when most of the disagreements are about the work itself, the task, then it depends. Sometimes performance goes up, sometimes it goes down. But what does it depend on? Brett Bradley from the University of Oklahoma and others have shown that it relates to psychological safety. We use that term to mean the extent to which you can be yourself in a particular setting. When psychological safety is high on a team, task conflict actually boosts performance. When psychological safety is low, almost any conflict hurts the team. So that's one factor that drives it. The second factor is the way in which conflict is handled, what the team's style is. And there's 3 common styles that tend to show up. This is from Leslie DeChurch's work. One style that we see in teams we'd call a competitive one. We have to fight, and it's about whose idea wins. Well, no, not exactly. It's about who wins. So it's really important that I win the arguments here. You've probably been on teams in which that's the predominant mode. In contrast, have you been on a team that's been in avoidance mode? We shouldn't disagree because we won't like each other. So let's not voice our opinion. Let's be very careful about things. This won't surprise you, but those two don't work particularly well. The third style is more collaborative in nature. And it's not that there's not winning and losing, but it's the ideas that win and lose, not the people that win and lose. And the goal is to come up with the best idea. In teams that adopt that style, which is we're not avoiding it, we're engaging in it, but may the best idea win and it's fine, when they have conflict, it boosts performance. What about communication? Anyone here think communication is not important? Right? I mean, it's a fundamental premise of teamwork, right? Very often when I say teamwork, you think communication. But what's clear about the research is it's not always the case that more is better. It's not just we need to communicate more. It's about the sharing of unique information that drives team effectiveness and communicating in a way that has closed-loop communications, meaning that both parties understand what's been said. So one thing you need to be careful about, if this unique information sharing is really what drives things, is that people inherently tend to assume that other people have the same information that they do. In a study that was done, it took one participant on a team, pulled them out, gave them some information, and told them, you're the only person on the team that has this information. And yet when they put them back and watched the team, that person almost inevitably did something or said something that only makes sense if other people had that information. Think about that. They were just primed, and they couldn't avoid doing it. So sometimes unique information isn't shared because people assume that other people already know it. And so we've got to really be conscious about drawing out that information. And for any of you that are on hierarchical teams, we see this in military and medical, but other hierarchical teams, the leader really has to encourage this, speaking up, or else sometimes junior people won't share information that they have. Here's a counterintuitive finding. I was in Las Vegas. Let's say I was doing research on probability theory. And I went to a restaurant called L'Atelier, very, very nice restaurant. It has an open kitchen concept where you could watch the kitchen staff. And during the meal I'm watching, and this kitchen is quiet. Stuff's flying out there. And coordination without even saying anything. Like one person's working on their plate and they look and they see a little sauce stain over here and they just clear off the other person's plate. Oh, humming. And partway through the evening, a group of big spenders come in. And they want to order these meals that are off the menu, and truffles and all sorts of things. All of a sudden, whoosh, they huddle up. Someone comes out of the back. The volume level increases. They figure out their plan. Whoosh, they get back to work and quiet again. So it's not always the case that it's about more communication. In fact, there's an inverted U. Some of the most effective teams don't talk quite as much as other teams do. Okay? It's about unique information sharing. Okay, so let's do back to our thought experiment. Have your team in mind. The members of your team know who's supposed to back up and about when and what they're supposed to be backing up about. Which of those styles, those conflict styles, would typify your team? And what do you spend your time disagreeing about? What about your team sharing of unique information? And is it possible that your team could do a better job in keeping each other well informed? Just process that a little bit. It's called cognition. Remember, cognition is a shared understanding. We like to use the term shared mental models. Research shows that highly effective teams have shared mental models. We're all having and we can have shared mental models about a variety of things, like how a task gets performed, or if this problem occurs, then what? When we worked with oil rig crews, what we would do is we would take folks on the offshore and on the ground here in Houston, video connection, and we would present scenarios and talk about what would happen if this occurs, for them to build a shared mental model about if and thens. But it can also be about where we're headed and who's responsible for things and priorities. This is why that quiet kitchen could be quiet, because they had a shared mental model. about how things are supposed to be performed. I watch surgical teams where the person's handing the scalpel before the surgeon even asks for it. And in sports, you see like, the ability to be able to do a blind pass in basketball because I know that forward's going to be filling the lane. Good teams have shared mental models. Now, a little deviation here. I decided I wanted to include one very tangible sort of thing that I've seen in many, many, many project teams and management teams. So if you take away only one tangible thing, this is the one I'd like you to do starting tomorrow. Be really clear when you're in team meetings whether what you're involved in is trying to make a decision, whether you're seeking input from the people that you're sharing the information with, or whether this is simply updating. I see this being a source of conflict on a very regular basis in teams where you think it's about a decision being made, and I think I'm just coming here to update you, and I get annoyed that you're querying things. Just this simple thing seems to have a boost in teams that we work with. Okay, now back to the regularly scheduled program. All right, let's talk coaching. Look, we could talk about leadership for days. I want to point out two things that we see from the research related to coaching. And the first is what we refer to as servant leadership. The research is starting to show that when a leader is perceived, at least as part of the time, as a servant leader, you get some better results. What you get are perceived fairness, trust, and these we call organizational citizenship behaviors, going above and beyond your job description. Right? And what do I mean when I say servant leadership? Well, here's the difference. A servant leader, the perception is that the team members, the leader works for the team members. My job as the team leader is to remove barriers. Football analogies, I'm the offensive lineman. Very often, though, the perception is that the team's job is to make the leader look good. That's not servant leadership. So it's not that it has to happen all the time, but when teams perceive some degree of servant leadership occurring, you get better results. The second finding that I think is really interesting relates to shared leadership. And I'm not talking about the official assignment of 2 or more leaders. What I'm talking about is having members of the team step up at times and demonstrate leadership behaviors. So you're not the leader, but you coach somebody on your team. You're not the leader, but you give them feedback. You're not the leader, but you're ensuring there's some accountability among other team members. Teams that demonstrate a little bit higher levels of shared leadership tend to outperform others, which is not surprising as we move organizationally to teams that have flatter organizational structure, meaning the leader can't be available for everybody all the time. And conditions, the 7th C. Teams do not operate in a vacuum. What happens around them makes a very big difference. And I told you earlier, it's very interesting when we look at what happens at the senior level in organizations. So this study of over 60 top management teams I find fascinating. In this study, when they took a look to see the level at which senior leadership teams were operating in a collaborative manner, it would predict not only employee satisfaction in the organization, but tangible retention levels. What's so interesting is that things are happening behind closed doors. So you would think that what's going on, among senior team members is not seen. It doesn't have to be seen. If the members of the senior team are not collaborating, somehow that message gets conveyed through the organization. So for any of you that are sort of a little more senior in the organization, it's not just about your team. What you do with your team has a ripple effect to others throughout the organization. Okay. Do our thought experiment. If I asked everybody on your team who's responsible for doing X, would I get the same answer? There's a really important shared mental model about roles. Is there any servant leadership? Are people stepping up at times? And then lastly, do you have the resources you need? And if not, is it possible to get some of those? So let's go full circle here. 7 C's. If you were to focus attention on 1 or 2 C's for your team, which would be the ones that would both boost your team's performance and where there might be some capability of making adjustments? That's what I'd like you to take away from this piece. All right. So how do we affect the 7 C's? 5 opportunities for being able to affect the 7 C's. I'm only going to focus on one of them, but I do want to mention what the 5 are. First one is when we're hiring people into our organization, are we hiring enough people with collective orientation? That's the first one. Second is, when we're forming teams, do we spend time to think about the mix of people and not simply who's available? Second. Third, what are we doing to prepare leaders and teams, whether that's about training or other sorts of things? Fourth, how do we help them adjust? And finally, rewards. If you want to ask me questions about rewards, please do so at the end. I won't have a lot of good stuff to tell you. It's one of the trickiest areas, but still one of the places where we can either encourage collaboration or discourage collaboration. But let's talk about adjustment. And the reason I want to talk about adjustment, and when I'm talking about adjustments here, I'm talking about teams engaging in constructive conversations to allow them to self-adjust. Remember, the best team that you were on wasn't the best team on day one. It was the best team because it adjusted. So that's why this is one of the ones that I think is one of the most powerful levers. And the reason it's so powerful is having constructive team conversations can influence any of the 7 C's. You might agree, you know what, we need to bring someone in who has some skills that we don't have. That's what's missing from this project. Or you might agree, we have a difference of opinion in terms of priorities. We need to talk about this because we're getting in each other's ways. So really want to encourage, and the research here is pretty clear. Chris Sarasoli and I published a meta-analysis that shows the teams that debrief perform about 20 to 25% better. It's a very simple intervention, to have a structured debrief, but the impact, the benefits are pretty high. And if you think 20 to 25% sounds high, which it does for a very simple intervention, I want to share with you, and what we did with the U.S. Navy, we taught prospective commanding officers how to conduct debriefs. Love the Navy. They let us randomly assign people to conditions. Some people got our training. Some people got 2 more hours of technical training. They ran simulated combat. And the teams that had leaders who ran effective debriefs outperformed the other teams by 40%. 40. That's a massive number. And we taught them nothing technical. Like, I don't know which end of a Tomahawk missile you're supposed to stand behind, which does not make me popular on board ship. I can tell you that now. So I want to encourage you, again, a key takeaway here is I want to encourage you to do some more of these debriefs. And here's what I mean when I say debriefs. I'm not simply referring to elaborate deep dive after action reviews or after there's been a major problem or once a project's over. I'm talking about pausing periodically from your work, doing a little bit of reflection on how we're working together, engaging in a discussion about what's working and what adjustments we need to make. Pick 1 or 2 things you want to do a little bit differently, agree to it, and get back to work. And this doesn't have to be a day-long activity, but this periodic cycle helps teams be successful. Now, I'm going to segue here and talk about some of the research that we've been doing at NASA. And really a key focus that we've had has been on debriefs. That's the piece that I'll focus on with you. So switching gears here now to talk about some of the research we've been doing here. And our grant has this title. Has a lot of really good words in it, I mean, you got to who's against composing and resilience? But we did do some research in the composition area, but I want to focus on the sort of self-sustaining teams. Our primary focus was on long-duration space, and innovations to be able to help with that. But secondarily, we've been asking ourselves, as we go through this research, what are the implications for teams here on Earth? And is there any secondary benefits from it? So, you know far better than I do, right? The need in long-duration space missions is different than in other missions. So it's isolated, confined, extreme environments with long communication lags, with mission control. In very tight quarters. All this means that crews doing long-duration space missions are going to be more autonomous, by definition, than any prior crews than we've ever had. Right? And what that also means is that they're going to need self-management countermeasures, things they can use on their own without ground being able to help them all the time. That's what our focus was on. And the other thing they need to do is they need to be able to sustain resilience. Remember I talked about resilience, that ability to bounce back. In the face of both acute and chronic stressors, think about the 2 types of stressors as low-level stressors that might annoy you. You click your pen, during the meeting all the time, Or in a small confined habitat, your definition of privacy may be different than mine. But also to be able to deal with big stressors, when a big problem occurs. So this is kind of our focus. Okay, if this is the need, what can we build in terms of a countermeasure? And we reflected on, how useful debriefs were in some of our prior work, and we thought, what about a debrief capability that can be self-guided by teams themselves? So we conducted research on this team-led, web-based debriefing tool based on an architecture that we have. We put together a short training video that goes with it. In our research, teams ran anywhere from 1 to 4 debriefs during their life cycle, and we did publish some research on this. Now, the reason we wanted to do research is because the prior research that was done on debriefs didn't deal with self-guided debriefs. It didn't deal with isolated, confined environments. We were pretty confident that project teams would benefit, from a good debrief. But what about teams that are going to be in these tight quarters? And we have to sustain resilience. So what we did is we built something using this Debrief Now architecture. And the architecture itself we had been using with military and medical teams. We used it with the forward surgical teams before they deployed to Afghanistan, and also with a variety of corporate teams. But in each case, what we populated the tool with was designed to fit the specific environment or mission. Like if I say communication is important, communication in a senior leadership team is different than communication in an astronaut team or in a manufacturing team. So we can't just ask a general question about communication. It's got to be targeted, and you'll see what we're trying to do here. So the way this tool works is they go online. They're given a series of questions about their team. It takes them 3 to 4 minutes. They're all multiple choice questions. They answer quickly. The tool then produces a customized discussion guide, which is unique for each team. So this team gets a different debrief guide than the other team does. They use that to discuss what's going on. They pick a few things to make adjustments on, and they move on. In our research, we've been allowing them anywhere from 15 to 40 minutes. You heard Jeff Davis say earlier that we worked with his team. Jeff's team also was willing to be sort of guinea pigs to try this out. With senior leadership teams, we might take an hour or 90 minutes with them. Key thing that we tell teams when we introduce this is that you own it. So you can have a discussion, and this is true for your teams too. You can have a discussion, but the team needs to own any agreements. So it's not like, oh, because something showed up in the guide, we have to make a change. No, you decide what changes you want to make, which is why I think it's well received and why actually changes are occurring in the teams that do the debriefs. So here's an example. This is one of the questions from when we did research with Nemo. I'll talk more about Nemo, but this is an undersea group of astronauts undergoing training, and they were asked a question about whether they were getting sufficient sleep, because we know that that can drain resilience. And based on their answers, that would target what the team should talk about. Do they need to talk about this or not? Here's an example of one from our senior leadership research that we did. This is an interesting one. We asked the question, the pace at which you're operating on. We found that a source of conflict in senior leadership teams is when some people think the team is moving too fast and some people think the team is moving too slow. And it never gets articulated, but it creates friction during meetings. So this surfaces it. Do we need to talk about our pace or not? In one CEO team that we had, they agreed to do a better job of triaging problems that came in. We need to take our time with this or not. And then the team would get a sort of summary guide like this. This is sort of the screen they see. They can see their high, moderate, and low priority levels. And then for anyone that they want to be discussing, they start with the highest priority. It gives them a screen that looks like this. One thing we found is not to give the exact numbers, not 3.71 or 82%, because then they debate about the numbers. So instead what we do is we just give enough to say, this is important. Your team felt it was important. Hey, here's a big open-ended question. Let's start talking about it. Let's follow up a bit. And then the last one is always a forward-looking question. So do we want to do anything differently about it? And the team could say no. On to the next one. When we did the research at Nemo and Hera, the types of topics that we focused on fell into three categories. Resilience-related topics, teamwork topics, and task work. And these are all important. So these are factors that are really important for teams that are going to be working and living together in confined spaces. Questions about privacy and meals and maintaining connection with home when you're isolated. But then there's also some of the classic things related to the 7 Cs and some things related to specific tasks, like in the Nemo thing, their most recent EVA. And again, the content was revised to fit the particular missions. So I'm going to briefly tell you about some of the results that we found in 4 different environments testing this tool. And the first study we did was at a lab environment. This is at the University of Central Florida. It was really a chance for us to have very tightly controlled conditions. It wasn't realistic in the sense of being folks that are like astronauts. These were student teams, but it was a space simulation, and we could create a lot of need for resilience for them. 48 teams, chance for us to refine things. Up here, this is the little thing that tells you we did sophisticated analyses, but I decided not to show you pages of little things with asterisks and bullets on it. Instead, if I cut through all this stuff, this is what we found. Teams that debrief and teams that entered with higher levels of efficacy was almost a surrogate measure of capability, performed better. But here's what's interesting. The reason they performed better, it was all predicted by going through resilience. So what happens is teams that had these sorts of discussions and that had the ability, they were more resilient, which in turn led to their performance improving. Second thing we did a small usability study with 3 teams here, 2 leadership teams and 1 hardware team. The focus was really more on, is this something that is perceived as credible? You know, it's good that the research says it works, but if people don't find it a useful experience, they're not going to use the tool. So this is just some data that we have, 5-point scale. Yes, these teams felt it helped uncover problems. They thought teams would benefit. And since I was actually running the debriefs on this rather than the team, we asked them, did we train leaders to do this? And as you can see on a 5-point scale, they're saying, yeah, 4.6. But then we did a series of studies in 2 habitats that you have at NASA. First of all, I think these are really great habitats for doing research. Folks we worked with in both these habitats were extremely supportive, and I want to tell you a little bit about each. Some of you, maybe many of you, are familiar with the Hera habitat that exists here at JSC. This is a great place to conduct research on teams. We're able to put people in an environment that's similar to what they might be living on a planet during a long-duration mission. We can close the doors. And when we did studies with them, we did a series of teams that lasted 7 days and 14 days. And I understand next year it's going to be up to 30-day periods of time. 8 4-person astronaut-like teams. We gathered a series of data from them. And what was nice, too, is that we could make some manipulations. So we could change work levels on given days. We could sort of put some things that test their resilience and delay communications. And for the teams that were in for 1 week, we had them do 2 debriefs on days 3 and 5. Again, This says fancy analysis. This is what we really found. Here the effects were more direct. The debriefing tool and resilience both predicted team performance. But one thing that we found that I thought was really interesting, we found a moderator effect. The time influences the relationship between resilience and team performance. So as a mission goes on, resilience is more closely related to performance. At the beginning of a mission, resilience and performance are unrelated. But over time, if we have a loss of resilience, it will affect our team in some way. And this has implications for long-duration missions, because it's not going to stop at day 6 or day 14, right? We're up on year 3, resilience is likely to be even more important. Another thing that we wanted to make sure was that a good self-management tool should have diagnosticity. It should be able to identify where there's potential concerns. So this is just at a glance. We chose 4 teams from our research, 10 factors, and you could see sort of the fact that results were different on different days and for different teams. What that means is that different crews need to discuss different things at different times, right? And that makes sense. So whether it's this tool or another tool, just some way to be able to make sure that we're guiding our teams to have conversations about the right types of things. Now let's talk Nemo. Nemo is an undersea habitat. Again, many of you may be quite familiar with this, but it's off the coast of Florida. About 60 feet below the sea. Think about a habitat that's about 40 feet wide, confined space. We conducted studies there with 2 crews. One did a 7-day mission, one did a 10-day mission. These are international crews of astronauts. Here they are actually sitting around using the tool. Depending on the length of the mission, we had them do 2 or 3 debriefs. And some of the questions were about those resilience topics, about sleep and food and privacy. Others were about teamwork and task work. And we gathered data from them. Now, right off the bat, I think what we really wanted to find out here, since this is the target audience for future missions, would they find this useful? Because if the astronauts don't find this useful, it doesn't matter what the science says. Right? It's got to be something that's both acceptable and empirically valid. So very positive reactions. And one really nice thing is that when the Nemo 18 crew had a chance to use this, they said afterwards, is there a possibility that we can also allow Nemo 19 to be able to try the tool, which I thought was pretty encouraging. 5-point scale, we get data from the various groups, and pretty consistently positive reactions from the folks, both analog environments. And here's just a few thoughts from them. So a chance to be able to encourage people to speak up. It's a conversation starter. Answering honestly, which I think is really important. And look, when communicating with ground, there's going to be a little bit of sort of screening that takes place. This was an important one. We find that one of the pitfalls in team debriefs is that maybe not spending time on the important things. And then some comments here about the missions. My favorite quote I didn't put up here was one that said, is there a family marriage version of the tool? To make sure that the soccer pickup schedule is handled properly. So I want to share with you, based on all of that, a couple of things looking forward to the future. So in space, a few things we found. It's going to be really important to allocate time on the schedule for the crews to be able to do their own debriefs. It's not going to happen naturally. They all like it, but this is from them. They told us, please make sure that there's time allocated in the schedule and allow some time for us to talk amongst ourselves. That's very important. Third, the content can't simply be on task work. We've got to guide them towards things about resilience and things like that. They may not naturally talk about privacy, but if they talk about it early enough and deal with it early in the mission, it's not going to be a problem. And they suggested more frequent ones at the beginning and then less frequently. And they also said, is it possible for crew members to be able to trigger their own? Hey, we've been out for a while. We think maybe it's time to huddle up and have a conversation. Now here on Earth, probably should be trying to ensure that astronauts are doing some of this sort of self-debriefing, self-management stuff here, so having them lead some of their own debriefs. But here's the real takeaway. I just want to encourage you. You don't need this tool. I mean, the tool is great. There's other tools that are out there. What I really want to encourage you, those that are on management team, project teams, R&D teams, etc., just get in the habit of periodically huddling up and conducting these debriefs. The Debrief Now tool is one. Some of you may be familiar with team dimensional training. There's other tools that are out there. But what I'd suggest is there just needs to be enough structure around this. So it's not just at the end of projects, and it's not just let's get together to discuss. Make sure you put a little bit of structure to your efforts. So final words, 3 takeaways. Teamwork matters, and it won't necessarily happen on its own, so we need to spend some time and focus on it. There is some science out there. Let's focus on the things that matter. And you probably could have predicted this one. Okay? So at this point, I'd welcome any questions that you might have. related to teams, teamworks, teams you're on, etc.
Okay. Let's see if this is still on. Okay, perfect. So we wanted to leave the last 30 to 45 minutes for a Q&A session. I know some people came ready with questions, so please don't make me stand up here awkwardly. Ask your questions. Raise your hand. I can get you the mic. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you describe how the debrief compares to the classical lessons learned?
Yeah. So most lessons learned review occur at the very end of something. We've gone through the experience, we've completed a project, we've completed a mission, we've done something, and we want to huddle up and figure out what lessons can we take away from this. Now, those are useful. You know, the military calls them after action reviews, the very end. That's the good news. They work pretty well. The bad news is that it's too late to make adjustments during the mission at that point, right? And very often what happens is they go in a binder, and sometimes those binders go up on a shelf someplace, and the next team may not have access to them. So when I talk about debriefs, that would be an example of a debrief. I wouldn't say that's not a debrief. But what I want to encourage is not just those. What I want to encourage is on a periodic basis. Like for project teams, we should do a debrief, a couple weeks in. Before we even get too sort of entrenched in the way we're operating, how's it working? Any quick adjustments? I'd want to do a debrief at the midpoint of the project because research shows that something changes in terms of team dynamics at that point. And then maybe then an after-action review or lessons learned at the very end to see other takeaways for future projects. So a real key to the debrief is that it has to be relevant and has to resonate with the team. So this is why sort of asking generic questions doesn't seem to work as well as asking very targeted questions. Whenever we build the questions for this, we work very closely with subject matter experts. So we built a debriefing tool for manufacturing teams at Frito-Lay. We spoke to the folks that were experts in packaging and processing. Where are the potential breakdowns? Which they may be based on the 7 C's, but when we talk about communication in a packaging team, what's it about? So when we built this out for Hera and Nemo, we talked to the folks that were very familiar with the mission, got their input from it. And then what we'll typically do, and I encourage you in any debriefing tool that you use, you speak to the experts, you draft it, you put it back to them, and you say, does this make sense? And then the real test for us is, in a tool like ours, is does it prioritize them properly? So the reason we did all this usability testing is to say, okay, it guided you to talk about privacy first. Did that make sense? It guided you to talk about EVAs. Did that make sense? And that's sort of the second validation. And at that point, we feel like we're pretty confident in the content. Does that help?
I have an additional one too, sorry, real quick, just to tag on to that. Can you speak a little to the balance of task work type questions in the debrief versus more the teamwork as you were talking about?
Yeah. So if I leave teams alone, I put them in a room and I go, we've allocated an hour and we'd like you to just huddle up and discuss how things are going, have a conversation. Engineers will talk about tensile strength. Doctors will talk about, the patient's disease, right? Finance people are going to talk about whether they hit the numbers or not. Teams don't naturally gravitate to talk about teamwork-related things. Someone doesn't say, did we back up at the right time? Are we sharing the right information? Are our priorities clear? So I think it's important to have a balance. And when I lead debriefs, it just requires a little more effort on my part to focus the team on teamwork-related things because they're naturally going to bring up the task work. But I think a balance is appropriate. It's perfectly appropriate. In fact, it's useful to engage in conversations about a particular event that occurred and how we handled it. That's very much about task work. Like the EVA questions, very much about a particular task. Or we want to explore why a certain problem occurred. That's about the task. But I think what I'd encourage you is to make sure that if you're allowing it to happen naturally, what you'll probably need to do is be sure there's someone in the room, a team member, a team leader, whatever, that says, hey, let's talk about some teamwork-related things as well and not spend our whole time just on task work things. That's where the comfort zone is. Yeah, so my point of comparison is when I've run them just with me there versus when there's the tool there. And you can run into a challenge in either of those cases. I mean, probably the biggest thing is if a leader really, really, really doesn't want to do this, it's very difficult to be able to run debriefs effectively, right? But the other thing is, you can run into a group that takes a little bit longer to warm up. I find that the warm-up occurs a little bit faster with the tool because people have already thought about it and weighed in, and they've done it anonymously. This is a really important point. When they answer those questions, they don't put their names in. So this topic makes it to the top. It's one that a lot of people on the team think it's important. Sometimes all it takes then is one person to say, yeah, I thought that was a concern, and all of a sudden you see the flow in. But you're absolutely right. Different teams have different dynamics. We just used the tool with a half a dozen teams in Hong Kong. Now, I was participating remotely, so I gave a talk remotely, and then there were 6 teams. And what was really interesting is that these teams were cross-cultural teams. So much in the way our astronaut crews are international, these teams were made up of people, half of whom were from Israel, and half of whom were from Asia. And you want to talk about cultural distance in terms of style, there were style differences there. And there was no facilitator. So someone from the team was the one that ran the sessions. And the feedback we got was that actually it's the first time in a while they had open conversations. And I think it's because they first had a chance to think and weigh in. You know, and introverts tend to process things a little bit first. So you come to a thing, we all huddle up and ask the question, how's things going? And the biggest extrovert in the group goes, well, let me tell you 42 things that I've seen. You know? And by the time the introvert's ready to go, it's like, okay, great, thanks, let's go. So, oh, I didn't have the chance. You know? Research shows, and Kim Yench from UCF has some data on this, that shows that the best debriefs are those in which a higher percentage of the team members participate in the discussion. So you're onto something important there. If you're a team leader, you have to ask. You got to draw things out a little bit. And sometimes you can say, what do you think, or what do you think about this? Yeah. So I think ideally, teams should get in the habit of doing a series of them. And in part because of just what you described. You know, if we haven't done them a lot, right, I'm on a team, we haven't done these before, we're starting to do this, some things are starting to surface, it's kind of interesting, we may not get a chance to touch on all of these things. And very often, in fact, what I'll do is I'll leave some materials behind when I run them so that a team can have their own discussion continued afterwards. So I do think those sort of over time make sense. What we found in some of the research we did with crews that were together for 14 days or for prolonged periods of time, we had to start varying the content. So it wasn't going to be the same questions on day 3, 5, 7, and 9. On day 7, we started asking some questions about connection to family and disconnect. And as we've been thinking about this with long-duration space crews, we thought we need to have a pool of items, some of which will be more appropriate at different points in the mission. And I think that's also true with leadership teams. You know, I've done these both ways. With some leadership teams, we asked the same questions, and we were able to do a check to see if there's progress. And in other teams, it's like, let's introduce a couple of new things into this next set and see whether it's something worth talking about. But I do think you get more benefit if it's part of an ongoing, again, regardless of the tool you use, just to periodically do the check-ins. They don't have to be long, elaborate, but a follow-up to the conversation you had probably would be worthwhile.
Okay, I had a couple questions emailed to me, so I know we're kind of going the debriefing path, so I'm going to throw a wrench. We're going to utilize you as the team expert that you are. One emailed question to me was asking about what do you do if you are on a team with individuals that are essentially at the same level as you, but the competency isn't there, and so in meeting the deliverables or tasks, certain individuals are pulling their weight more than others, and it's causing dissension and kind of tension, but it's a difficult topic to address. What are your thoughts on how to approach something like that?
So first of all, that's probably a very rare occurrence. I can imagine that none of you have ever experienced a team where some people were contributing more than others. So, you know, like any good detective, I think we have to sort of sort through the clues to figure out what's going on. So I'm asking myself, as I think, which of the 7 C's? Right? So is this a capability question? I mean, sometimes you see people who aren't carrying their weight because they don't have the skill, the expertise to be able to do the job. It's a bad fit. Right? And it's as frustrating for them as it is for others on the team. But other times it may be more about the mindset. And are people willing and able to sort of step up and do what they need to do? Do they believe it's important? Do they believe in the mission? Right? And then I ask the question, is it one person, is it 2 people, or is it the majority of the team? One thing we got to be careful about is I don't like using team interventions to deal with one person. We do this sometimes, if I'm being honest, we do this sometimes as a cop-out because we're afraid to confront the person. So rather than having a frank conversation saying, hey, you know, you're not getting it done, let's talk about what's getting in the way, why are you not, you know, getting some of the work done you need to get done, and dealing with them one-on-one, we have a team discussion about what's going well, and everybody in the room is waiting, you know. Is that person going to be called out or not? So in some cases the answer is it's a one-on-one conversation. Right? Now if you tell me that it's over half the team, that's a more systemic question. We've got to figure out what's getting in the way. It could even be a cognition issue, right, where some people aren't aware of their roles or the priorities. So it appears to me like you're not carrying your weight because your priorities are different than my priorities. I see this with over half the team, then we definitely need to huddle up and talk about it. And in this particular team you described, you talked about it as being, fairly similar in level. But if there is a leader, there's some coaching responsibility there as well. It's not always going to be the team self-correcting the team there. Yeah? Yeah. So, remember the slide about the degree of interdependency. Well, first of all, your Tour de France example is a great one. Boy, talk about interdependency. For anybody who's sort of an untrained observer, it can look like it's an individual bicycle race. It's as far from an individual bicycle race as possible. You can take one of the best riders in the world, similar to those financial analysts, and plug them on another team, and if they don't have good supporting cast around them, that person will not win the race next time. Right? The current winner would not win on an inferior team. So when I think about interdependency, right, we're talking about interdependency within the team. And in the case of Tour de France, what that competition does, it actually ups the ante for everybody. So that's fine. And there isn't interdependency between them. Other than driving recklessly, what your team does and what my team does, they're not really dependent. You could drive fast or slow. It's not going to help me. It might motivate me. But inside an organization, it's different. And what you're starting to describe is a concept of team of teams, where it's not simply the case that I'm on my team and that's it, but I'm on a team and you're on a team and you're on a team, and to the extent there is some interdependency, that competition, which might appear healthy in other cases, gets in the way. So what we've been starting to advocate in those environments is it's great to huddle up your own team. It's great to huddle up your own team and engage in debrief discussions, but if we really need to have cooperation with the secondary team, then we need to sometimes huddle up with them as well. And that's true even if you think about ground crew and a flight crew, right? They each have their own. They should be having their own discussions. But periodically, there's got to be the bigger circle drawn. And if we don't, we don't create any context for those teams that are both competing and need to collaborate, the natural tendency to compete is going to win out. And that's where the problem occurs.
I had another email question. Mm-hmm. I promise these are just not my questions. Somebody asked.
And I'd like to report that I didn't email them either. So.
Plans. Another question that was sent to me was asking about, so now in the context of your presentation, the team maybe is well selected, so kind of different from the last scenario I gave you, and there's a high motivation, but some of those conditions, the C, one of the 7 Cs, isn't there. So you have a very highly motivated team, maybe the leader isn't as receptive to using some of these strategies, or the organization doesn't provide the resources, or the team just doesn't feel supported that way. What can a team do in that situation to continue to thrive?
Yeah, let me differentiate between two factors. Let me differentiate between the coaching C, right, when it's about the leader, and the condition C, when it's about the resources, the environment, the support. On the condition side, one of the things I try and coach teams about is that we need to be clear about our negotiables and non-negotiables, right? And also, I like to talk about there being sort of 3 zones. There's a zone of control that we as a team can simply decide we're doing this differently. We don't need anybody's permission. Great. That's like the blue zone, right? Then there's a middle zone where we can't control it, but there's a chance we can influence this. And that's kind of the yellow zone. And then there's the red zone. And the red zone are those things that we can neither control nor influence. And it's really important to be able to be aware of those distinctions. It's important from a personal health perspective because, incidentally, spending a lot of time in the red zone is physically debilitating. Research has been done with adolescent girls and has lately been extended to older humans, and systemic inflammation levels go up, which is related to a lot of diseases. When you spend too much time in that red zone, you're unable to let go of unattainable sorts of things. So the first is let's be aware. The second is the things that are in our blue zone, let's just do it, And then let's figure out those things we can go after and request. And that's that yellow zone. And I think as a team, sometimes it's worthwhile saying, what are we lacking? And let's put together a compelling business case and request it. But let's be clear, if it's in the yellow zone, just because we put together a good case doesn't mean we're going to get it, right? And then when members of the team come back and keep referring to things that are in the red zone, have you ever had this experience on a team? There's someone that keeps going back and bringing up those things that you can't do anything about. It's like, of course you haven't. So, it's like the software has been delivered to us and it has bugs in it. Well, first of all, one thing I can tell you, any of you that have done technology work know that all software have bugs. As a psychologist, I'll tell you all people have bugs, so it's just natural, okay? But, so we're looking at this software, and we've been told there'll be no corrections made to this for the next 3 months. And then in each meeting, somebody on the team comes and goes, I can't believe the bugs, we got to get these bugs fixed, Like, what does that do to the energy in the team? Like, wah, wah, So on my team, we have what we call the 24-hour wallow rule. You could try this at home, too. The 24-hour wallow rule goes something like this. If you're having a problem, you're having a bad day, something's going wrong, if you come to anybody on our team, we will be extremely supportive for 24 hours. And then we'll ask you 2 questions. Is there anything you can do about it? And is there anything I can do to help? And if you say no and no, we'll say LIG. Let it go. Now, I will tell you, it's a lot better to say it than to hear it. But I've been both the giver and the recipient of that. And I think in teams, it's really important to focus attention on those things in blue and yellow and have the discipline not to get stuck too much in the red. Now, the second part of your question, which was 24 minutes ago, dealt with the leadership aspect of it. And this is a little bit tougher. So if I am on a team and my leader doesn't get it, it's hard. Because it's clearly not a blue zone issue. There's things that only the leader can do and I can't do them. It's a yellow zone issue to the extent that I can try and influence my leader to do some things differently. I sometimes see teams that are able to be effective when they start sort of demonstrating some of the coaching C's themselves. So if my team leader isn't going to be able to help us in certain ways, can we rally up and do our own coaching and give our own feedback and do our own job of trying to generate some resources and support the working for a difficult leader? And any of you who have been in your career for a long time have had this experience at some point, hopefully not currently. That's a little bit tougher one, and I really look at what can we huddle up and do as a team, and how can I possibly give some constructive feedback to my leader? So the first one's about multi-team systems, and the second one is about timing as to when you introduce a debriefing tool. So we did some research in the medical world, and this was military medical. So remember the TV show MASH? Yeah, so there's a modern version to that. The research shows that you have like what they call the golden hour. And in combat situations, you need to keep wounded people alive for an hour. That's kind of a critical window. And when you do that, your mortality rates go down tremendously. And so what starts happening is the military starts putting medical facilities nearby, closer to the action. So we're able to treat wounded soldiers faster and closer to the action. So they'll set up these sort of tents, nearby. And in some cases what will happen is if something bad happened, they have mass casualty incidents, right, where multiple people are coming in at once. So what they really are is they are a multi-team system. And there's these multiple places inside the tent that people can be treated. And some of it's individual people being treated, soldiers being treated independently. In other cases, it's handoffs that need to occur from one station to another station around this. Complex, tricky, but they need to be able to maintain sort of a shared mental model about some things. So back to your question earlier about how do you get the content right. What we have to do in that case is figure out where are the interdependencies. So there's certain things that everybody in the big tent needs to know. It needs to be maintaining an awareness of. There's other things that only the people on my little table here need to be aware of. We need to know whether this patient has allergies. But more collectively, we need to know what resources are available and whether it's possible to move a patient off to someone to a sort of a higher level of medical care. So when I start becoming aware of those interdependencies, it gives me some insights about how we should be handling both development on the training side and also the debriefing process. So having a large group debrief where most of the conversation are about things that are really about the small teams is just a frustrating experience for everybody. So we do some of the larger group things, the system of teams, but we do it around things that are relevant to all the groups. So you're not simply fodder. Let's wait our 45 minutes until we can talk about us. We might split off and have some conversations about the small things, and then we might talk collectively about things like, where were the bottlenecks in this case? That's important to everybody under the big tent. So if you can use that as an analogy, if you will, for other sorts of settings, I think that same mindset can be applicable. So this now is about the question of size, too. There's some research that shows, when teams get very large, that it's difficult to be very effective. Having said that, The team size has to be as large as it needs to be. So there's some instances where I can't have a, quote, ideal team size from the research. We need 30, 40 people. The problem is trying to do a debrief discussion with 30, 40, 50 people is quite difficult. What we've done in one environment is we get data from everybody, and then we take representatives from the team. They engage in the discussion, and there's feedback back to the group and say, we agreed to these sorts of things. Is everybody comfortable with it? Another way of doing that at times is to get the leaders together. And really it depends on the situation. So if the shared mental model that needs to be in place is a shared mental model among the leaders of the various stations, then they're the perfect group to do the debrief together. And then they can choose what needs to be disseminated to their teams, because everybody on the team doesn't need to know this. So sometimes that's appropriate too. But part of the message is it's not one size fits all. It's about sort of fit for purpose based on the interdependency and the requirements of the team. And the second question was about timing. So I can only debrief about experiences if my team has experiences. So it's hard for me to do, I can do a pre-brief. We could talk about how we might want to do things. We can do a pre-brief where we talk about if certain things happen, what do we want to do. I can establish a team charter. There's research that shows that team charters actually are pretty effective, helpful tool in some ways. But to do a debrief on how we're working together, we've had to at least spend some time working together. So that's why I say kind of a rule of thumb for me for project teams is I want to get them together once before they calcify. Right? They've got to be together long enough to that we have something to discuss, but not so long that we're set in our ways. And for a team that works daily, that might be 2 or 3 days into a project. For a team that meets weekly, it might be at the end of week 2 or week 3 where we have that initial conversation. But before the team ever works, I would call that more of a pre-brief, which can be an effective intervention too. Yeah. Yeah. So you're right. So first of all, beyond maybe a dozen people, it's hard. Right? Many of you have had that experience. It's hard. Now, there are circumstances where we have no choice. We need to be larger. But I want to think creatively here, which is that there's teams that are like, this is my core team, and then there's other people on the team. And most of you are on more than one team as well. So thinking about a solution in which we have our core team, and it's 8 people, it's 10 people, but we have times in which we invite other people in. And they're like the cousins in our family, They're not nuclear family, they're cousins, and the cousins add creativity and we bring them in. And it may just be one person as a sort of a point of view that's different than anybody in our team has, but I don't need to necessarily anoint them an official team member each time, because that's when we sort of get that creep occurring, It's like bigger and bigger and bigger, and at some point it becomes unwieldy. My email address is scott.tannenbaum@groupoe.com. You can reach out to me. I have a blog that also has some information on things where I write about the 7 C's. Ed Solis and I are starting to write a book. That'll be a source of resources as well. But I'm happy to take questions or follow up from people if you want to send me a note. As you can tell, I like talking about this stuff.
Fantastic. All right, one more round of applause.